Hi guys. What are you doing? Hey friends, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan and we are here in Wyoming. I hear a lot of times that people think that they want goats or they want chickens, and so today I just kind of want to walk you through what it really looks like and the things you need to consider if you are actually going to get goats or chickens. The first thing that I wanted to mention is goats and chickens are not a seasonal animal, so they require full year maintenance. Doesn't matter how warm it is, doesn't matter how cold it is. It's currently about 5 degrees out here. So it's so important to remember that you have to take care of them when it's freezing cold and, oh, we have a visitor back here, when it's also beautiful. Obviously, they can be really easy in the summer, but you do need to consider what you're going to do with them in the winter, how you're going to keep them watered, fed, and how you're going to maintain it, because there's some days when there's 4 feet of snow out here and you have to make sure that the goats and chickens can get outdoors. So let's jump into all of those things, but first thing I wanted to mention is just making sure you consider, is it something you want to do when it's 5 degrees outside? What are you doing? Okay, so today I thought it'd be kind of fun to do something a little bit different, and we try to hang out with our animals every single day, so I thought, what better place to come hang out and chat with you guys than the barn? So going off of the cold weather, there's a few other things you do need to consider when it comes to whether goats or chickens are right for you, and that, or really any animal, and that is the climate. A lot of people think extreme cold, the animals aren't going to like it, but it turns out, in my opinion, extreme heat is probably worse than extreme cold. Our animals do a lot better in the cold because they adjust. You could probably see in the prior clips with Huck and Boone, they grow a huge winter coat. Their bodies know how to acclimate to it. So I personally believe goats and chickens struggle more with heat than they do cold. Therefore, if you are going to be getting goats or chickens, you need to make sure that your climate is appropriate for them, and that you're taking all the precautions that are needed to fit that climate. So, extreme heat. A few things you can do is make sure your chickens and goats have tons of shade. So one way we do that is we give the goats access to this barn, so they can always come in here. It's always shady in here, and it's always dry in here in the cold months. So we always give them a good climate or shade for them to hang out in, whereas the chickens have a good run, and then they also have a ton of cover outside. They have the goat run that they're allowed to come into, and there's trees and that kind of thing for when they're free ranging. So we always make sure that there is shade and a dry place for them to come to. So for us, it's the chicken coop, which you guys have seen in our previous videos, and for the goats, it's the run. A few other things that are important to consider with climate is making sure that you have enough water and that you have enough water sources. So when it's really hot, maybe giving ice baths or ice blocks to your chickens, cold water, and then also making sure your goats always have cold water, clean water. Those are all so important in taking care of them, and in the winter, making sure that they have warm enough water. So our goats really don't need supplemental heat. All they need is making sure that their water stays warm, which we just use this bird bath waterer. This is a dirty one that we're not using this year, but we have a couple of these to make sure we always have extra on hand in case one goes down. But it is so critical to make sure that your chickens and goats always have water, and we have one of those in the chicken water as well. Okay, so beyond climate, some other things you need to consider is predators. There are so many predators. I actually made an entire video on predator proofing your chickens. So I'll link that above and down below if you're interested in checking that out. But it's so important to make sure that you have a safe place for all of your animals. Believe it or not, everything is trying to eat chickens. So we have skunks, we have raccoons, we have dogs, cats, there are hawks, owls. There are so many animals around here that are trying to eat chickens. It is so important that we always have a safe place for them to go, and we have a rooster. Our rooster does an amazing job. We actually watched our rooster fight off a coyote. So our rooster does an amazing job watching his hens and making sure everyone stays safe. Predators aren't just an issue for chickens though, they're also an issue for goats. Believe it or not, especially if your goats are not horned, they're not very good at defense. So It's so important that you are watching out for them and that they have a safe fenced off area to stay away from predators. The number one predator that we have to deal with is dogs. Believe it or not, dogs kill a ton of goats because they're fast, they have teeth, and the goats just can't really fight them off that well. So we worry about dogs, especially just stray or lost dogs. We don't have a ton of neighbors out here, but it's still a concern. So making sure our goats are always put away and always safe is something that is so important for us. And then the final thing you really need to consider before getting animals, especially goats or chickens, is chemicals. A lot of people, I'm sure many of you, fertilize your yards or put Roundup on your weeds. When you have free-range chickens or goats that do tend to get out because they are incredible escape artists, you have to make sure that you are not using any of those things on your lawns. Goats and chickens love getting into things, they love free-ranging, and so if they get into your grass that you just fertilized or they get into some of the weeds that you just sprayed Roundup on, that's now going into their bodies. And that is so bad, so unhealthy for them. So making sure that you are staying away from any chemicals in your yard is also something that you need to consider. Okay, so you decide you want to bring home some chickens. What do you need? First and foremost, the obvious thing is food. But I want to take you over to where we store our food, because if you pick up just a bag of food and you put it in a barn, it's going to get eaten by rodents or... Hi, Davey. Hi, honey. Or cats are going to eat it, or your dog's going to eat it. So let me take you over and show you where we store our food in order to make sure that the money we're spending on our chicken feed is actually going towards our chickens. We just use this huge drum. I'll stand up. This is how big it is. For comparison, I'm 6 feet tall. So we actually just cut the lid off of it and we keep all of the chicken feed inside this. We just keep a tin can, an old tin can on the inside of it to scoop the feed. And that is how we keep this food safe from the chickens and also from mice or other rodents that might want to eat this food. Okay, next thing you need to get is bedding for them. So you can use shaved wood chips. That worked really well when we just had a few chickens. We actually only started with 2 chickens, and so when it was just the 2 of them, that worked really well. Now we just get big bales. I'm actually sitting on one of certified weed-free hay. It's like $12 a bale right now. You can get it at like Murdoch's, Tractor Supply, any of those. And that works really well for keeping them insulated, dry, and cool in the winter. A few other things that are really important to consider is a coop. Obviously they need a place to sleep. They love actually sleeping up high, so making sure that they have kind of a ledge to lay on or sit on to sleep is really good. I'll link the video above for our full coop tour, but they need a coop and they also need a run. Chickens don't like being confined. They need to have enough space outdoors so they can run around. I'm sure most of you know that, but making sure that they have a run, and if you're going to allow them to go outside, they need to have fencing or a place to be safe. So we have that run outside so they can go in there. Predators cannot get in there. But if they want to go free range, they also have a few layers of security they can go through in order to do so. So I'll link that video if you want to go check out kind of how we've structured ours to keep all of our animals safe, but that's super important to consider. Along with the feed, you also need to make sure you have the proper supplements for chickens. So all we really do here is mineral lick, because all we do here is oyster shells, because ours free range. They're getting a ton of vitamins and minerals from that food and from the soil. So we don't really supplement them beyond oyster shells, making sure that they have enough calcium to keep the shells really strong. So another thing that I have found, which definitely do your own research before doing this, but chickens are seasonal animals, so they don't lay year round. So we have like 27 chickens. So it's hard for me to buy eggs in the winter when I have 27 chickens right outside my door. So what we have found that works really well is actually feeding your chickens cat food. There's a ton of fat in it, and I found that the fat and the proteins actually work well to encourage the girls when they're molting actually lay more eggs. So definitely do your own research, but I find that really well. Now let's jump into the house where we keep all of the supplements, and I'm gonna walk you through what we use for goats and how to get started with goats. All right, we are back in the house. I wanted to come in for the goats because they tend to be a little bit more technical and require a little bit more gear that I wanted to show you. Got myself a nice cup of tea, so we are all warmed up. But just running through the goats, a few things that are important to consider if you're wanting to get goats is what it will take to maintain them. This is just the bare minimum. This is what we do in order to keep our goats safe. There are a lot of other medicines and vaccines that you need to look into that are annual things, but this is just very high level what we use on a monthly basis to keep our goats and our herd healthy. Definitely do your own research, talk to your vets, figure out what makes sense for your animals. I'm not a vet. This is no professional advice. This is just what we've done at a very bare minimum and what we have on hand at a bare minimum in order to keep our herd healthy. So first thing you need to think about is hoof trimming. You actually do have to trim goats' hooves. It doesn't matter what kind of goat you have, whether they're indoor, outdoor, pack goats, milk or dairy goats, doesn't matter. You need to trim your goats' hooves. So for that, I use this pair of special scissors. I will link them down below, and they look very similar to gardening shears, and they are used to trim the hooves. If you're interested in how Sam and I trim our goats' hooves, we'd be more than happy to do a quick tutorial on that. I'm kind of the holder, the feeder, the distractor, and Sam is the trimmer. So I would say it's definitely a two-person job, but it's really not as bad as it sounds. Nowadays, we can probably do a goat in 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how bad the hooves are. So that's something that you want to do at a minimum monthly. And we have actually made a special head holder that helps us hold the goats. So with the horns, it makes it really easy because they can't get out. But if you're interested in that, we can kind of show you. It's definitely nothing fancy. We just built it out of scrap wood, but it works really well for keeping our hooves trimmed and keeping the goats still when doing that process. Next thing is having a weight tape. So this is one of those flexible tapes, or the other thing we'll do is we'll just take a piece of string and a tape measure, but you administer a lot of things to the goats based off of their weight and their height, and you also want to make sure that your goat is healthy. So a way that you can weigh your goat through measurements is basically by taking the width of your goat, so right behind their shoulders, around their body. You do width in inches times width in inches times the length of the body. And if you want to see a diagram, I'll link one down below. And then you divide those numbers by 300, and that will give you generally the weight of your goat. So you want to make sure at a minimum you have a string and a tape measure or a sewing tape measure in order to measure your goats, so that you can always make sure, one, they're within a healthy weight, and if you need to administer any medicines to them, you have that readily available, so you're giving them the proper amount. Next, you want to make sure that you're taking your goats in for yearly vaccines, or you can do them yourself, totally up to you. Sam and I do our vaccines ourselves. We are comfortable with that, but definitely do all of your own research and make sure that you're doing everything your goats need to in order to be safe. So I will leave that for your own research, but make sure that you are doing yearly vaccinations and just kind of checkups on your goats. Two more things that are just, actually I guess 3 more things that are just bare minimum is having iodine. So this is so important because, as a lot of us know, goats are escape artists. They're kind of clumsy. They're just goofballs, and they do hurt themselves. So whether they get step on something, fall on something, hit barbed wire, you're trimming their hooves, and maybe you go a little bit too shallow while you're learning, they will bleed, and you need to make sure that you have iodine for them to keep everything clean to avoid any infections. There are a few other just kind of supplements that we like to have on hand. One is a mineral lick, and the other is vitamin B. You can do it in this oral, or you can do it in this injection form. Totally whatever you prefer. Definitely do your research on vitamin B before you are giving it to your goats, but that is something when there's drastic changes, because they're pretty emotional animals, we are always giving them vitamin B when there's big changes, like you're weaning one of the kids or something like that. Definitely do your research, but vitamin B is something we always have on hand as well. And then finally, it sounds ridiculous, but a collar and a leash. Sam and I will never own a pet that we can't either release or take with us in the case of an emergency. We live in Wyoming. There are fires, there's tornadoes, there can be crazy weather. And so for me, it's almost irresponsible for us to own an animal that we cannot safely take with us and get out of the ranch if we needed to. Obviously, this is worst case scenario. This is also really important in the case of a sickness, or you just need to tame your animal. Making sure you have a collar and a leash for every animal is something that I consider an absolute bare minimum to make sure that you have a way of getting them either to a vet or getting them off the property if something were to happen. I just think responsibly, that's what we all need to have. Chickens, I can open up the cage and let them go, let them fend for themselves. Goats, I can't necessarily do that. They're herd animals, they follow us. So that I think at a bare minimum, making sure that they have a safe home and a safe place and we are able to get them somewhere is super critical. I hope you found this video helpful. I know this was a ton of talking, but these are all things that I think are so important when it comes to owning a goat or chickens and what you should really think about before you invest in one or the other. If you have any other options or tips that you think are really important that others should know, please feel free to leave them down in the comments. I appreciate you all taking your time to come hang out with me, and I will catch you all in the next one. Thanks again for joining. Bye.